sealed plane, 30 passengers, and a mid-flight murder that seems impossible. But can you figure out who committed this chilling crime? Or is Hercule Poirot the only one who can uncover the truth? The sleek silver aircraft Prometheus 23 sat gleaming on the runway, its engines humming with anticipation. The passengers, a mix of high society and ordinary travelers, boarded the flight from Paris to London, blissfully unaware that for one among them, this would be their final journey. Inside the luxurious first-class cabin, a hush of polite conversation and the clinking of crystal glasses filled the air. A businessman in a crisp suit adjusted his cufflinks. A crime novelist absent-mindedly jotted down ideas in a leather-bound notebook. A glamorous actress tilted her compact mirror, checking her reflection with a practiced pout. Seated near the window, meticulously dressed in his signature gray suit and polished shoes, was Hercule Poirot, the famed Belgian detective. His mustache, perfectly waxed, twitched slightly as he observed his fellow passengers with quiet amusement. Across the aisle sat Madame Giselle, a woman known only to a select unfortunate few. A moneylender of the most dangerous sort, she dealt in secrets as much as she did in loans. Many owed her some in money, others in silence. Dressed in dark silk, her sharp eyes flickered over the passengers before she leaned back, seemingly at ease. But for a woman like Giselle, enemies lurked in every shadow. As the plane ascended into the clouds, time passed in quiet luxury. Stewardesses moved gracefully between the aisles, offering refreshments. A game of bridge was casually discussed among the passengers. Poirot, ever the observer, sipped his coffee, noting the small interactions, the whispered conversations, the stolen glances. Something in the air felt off. Then, somewhere over the English Channel, it happened. A soft, almost imperceptible gasp escaped a flight attendant's lips as she leaned over to check on a passenger who hadn't responded to the dinner service. A moment later, the tray in her hands clattered to the floor, sending silverware skidding under the seats. A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin as heads turned toward the source of the disturbance. The stewardess stood frozen, her face pale, her trembling fingers clutching the edge of the seat. Madame Giselle was slumped unnaturally, her head lolled to one side. Poirot's sharp eyes locked onto the scene. Something wasn't right. The woman's expression was too still, her body eerily rigid. And then he saw it. A tiny, almost invisible mark on her neck. Poirot leaned forward, a terrible realization dawning upon him. This was no natural death. And the most chilling part, the killer was still on the plane. The impossible murder. For a fleeting moment, silence clung to the cabin like an oppressive fog. Then, the murmurs swelled whispers turning into gasps, gasps into sharp, frantic voices. A woman was dead, on a moving plane, with no sign of struggle. The flight attendant, pale and shaken, stepped back as passengers craned their necks, eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and dread. Some recoiled, others whispered among themselves. Poirot, however, did not move. He remained still, his sharp gaze fixed on Madame Giselle's lifeless form. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. His trained eyes swept over her elegant dress, her lifeless hands resting unnaturally on her lap, the faint, almost undetectable discoloration around her lips. A clue only visible to those who knew what to look for. Then his gaze dropped to the floor near her seat, and there, barely noticeable against the plush carpet, was something that sent a cold chill down his spine. A tiny, nearly invisible dart. Poirot bent down, retrieving it with the utmost care. It was minuscule, no longer than a sewing needle, its tip barely glistening with residue. Poison. A silent, efficient killer. But how had it been delivered? There was no gun, no blowpipe in sight, and no one had seen anything. The weight of the mystery pressed down on the cabin like an unspoken curse. Passengers were accounted for. The doors were locked. They were thousands of feet in the air, trapped together, and yet someone had just committed an impossible murder. The biggest questions loomed, casting a sinister shadow over everyone aboard. How had the murder been committed in plain sight? Had the killer struck in the chaos of the flight, hidden in the lull of conversation? Where did the poisoned dart come from? It wasn't the kind of weapon someone could just casually carry. This was methodical, planned, professionally executed. And most chilling of all was the killer planning to strike again. Poirot turned to the passengers, his voice calm but laced with authority. Mesdames et messieurs, I regret to inform you, this was no ordinary death. This was murder. And the killer is among us. A stunned silence followed. Then, a sharp, piercing click. Poirot turned just in time to see a Manon of the passengers slowly reaching into his coat pocket. And in that moment, a terrible thought seized Poirot's mind. What if the killer wasn't done yet? The suspects. Everyone has a secret. A murder in midair, a locked room mystery at 30,000 feet, and 4 passengers who, on the surface, seemed like strangers but each carried a secret they'd rather take to the grave. Poirot observed them, his keen eyes flitting over their faces, searching for the cracks in their masks. Murderers always slip up eventually, and in this cabin there was no place to run. Daniel Clancy, the crime novelist, who knew too much. A wiry man with ink-stained fingers and restless eyes, Clancy sat with a notebook open on his lap, a fountain pen poised above the pages. He had been writing when the murder happened, or so he claimed. Astonishing, isn't it? He murmured, almost to himself. A murder, right here, under everyone's nose. Almost poetic. He sounded more fascinated than horrified. Clancy was a crime writer, celebrated for crafting intricate whodunits. But Poirot found something unsettling about the way he leaned forward, his lips twitching as if savoring the unfolding mystery. Had Clancy finally taken his fictional expertise to reality? Had he committed the perfect murder, just to see if Poirot could solve it? Lady Horbury, the glamorous star with a tainted past. She sat in her plush seat, legs elegantly crossed, her gloved fingers trembling ever so slightly as she sipped champagne. On the surface, she was every inch the poised socialite dressed in the latest Parisian fashion, diamonds glittering at her throat. But Poirot had seen many like her before. The type who hid desperation behind rouge and fine fabrics. Lady Horbury was once Madame Giselle's client, a woman known for loaning money to the rich when their fortunes turned sour. And when Madame Giselle collected debts, she did not ask twice. Had Lady Horbury's glamorous life been nothing but a crumbling illusion? Had Madame Giselle threatened to expose her, forcing her to take drastic action? As Poirot studied her, she met his gaze, and for just a fraction of a second, her polished facade cracked. Dr. Bryant, the healer who could kill. The good doctor sat upright, his expression stoic, too calm, too controlled. A medical genius, highly respected in his field. But Poirot knew something the others didn't. Dr. Bryant was an expert in toxins. The poisoned dart, so precise, so lethal, could have only been the work of someone who understood the science of death. When Poirot mentioned poison, a shadow flickered in Dr. Bryant's eyes. Was it surprise or recognition? Jane Grey, the innocent girl, with a dangerous secret. The young air hostess stood near the aisle, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes darted nervously across the cabin, as if trying to remember every passenger's movements. To most, she was just a stewardess, polite, efficient, invisible. But Poirot had learned long ago. The most unassuming people often held the deepest secrets. She was the closest to the crime scene. She saw everything, perhaps too much. And yet, she was afraid. Not of the murder. Of something else. Something or someone this plane had shaken her to her core. And then, it happened. A loud, shattering sound ripped through the tension. A wine glass slipped from Lady Horbury's hand, smashing onto the floor. But that was not what made Poirot's pulse quicken. A single piece of paper fluttered from her lap. Poirot bent down and retrieved it. His breath hitched as he read the hastily scribbled words. I saw who did it, and if they know I saw, I won't make it to London alive. Who wrote the note? Who had seen the killer? And more importantly, who else on this plane was about to die? The suspects. Everyone has a secret. A murder in midair, a locked room mystery at 30,000 feet, and 4 passengers who, on the surface, seemed like strangers but each carried a secret they'd rather take to the grave. Poirot observed them, his keen eyes flitting over their faces, searching for the cracks in their masks. Murderers always slip up eventually, and in this cabin there was no place to run. Daniel Clancy, the crime novelist, who knew too much. A wiry man with ink-stained fingers and restless eyes, Clancy sat with a notebook open on his lap, a fountain pen poised above the pages. He had been writing when the murder happened, or so he claimed. "Astonishing, isn't it?" he murmured, almost to himself. "A murder, right here, under everyone's nose. Almost poetic." He sounded more fascinated than horrified. Clancy was a crime writer, celebrated for crafting intricate whodunits. But Poirot found something unsettling about the way he leaned forward, his lips twitching as if savoring the unfolding mystery. Had Clancy finally taken his fictional expertise to reality? Had he committed the perfect murder, just to see if Poirot could solve it? Lady Horbury, the glamorous star with a tainted past. She sat in her plush seat, legs elegantly crossed, her gloved fingers trembling ever so slightly as she sipped champagne. On the surface, she was every inch the poised socialite dressed in the latest Parisian fashion, diamonds glittering at her throat. But Poirot had seen many like her before. The type who hid desperation behind rouge and fine fabrics. Lady Horbury was once Madame Giselle's client, a woman known for loaning money to the rich when their fortunes turned sour. And when Madame Giselle collected debts, she did not ask twice. Had Lady Horbury's glamorous life been nothing but a crumbling illusion? Had Madame Giselle threatened to expose her, forcing her to take drastic action? As Poirot studied her, she met his gaze, and for just a fraction of a second, her polished facade cracked. Dr. Bryant, the healer who could kill. The good doctor sat upright, his expression stoic, too calm, too controlled. A medical genius, highly respected in his field. But Poirot knew something the others didn't. Dr. Bryant was an expert in toxins. The poisoned dart so precise, so lethal, could have only been the work of someone who understood the science of death. When Poirot mentioned poison, a shadow flickered in Dr. Bryant's eyes. Was it surprise or recognition? Jane Grey, the innocent girl, with a dangerous secret. The young air hostess stood near the aisle, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes darted nervously across the cabin, as if trying to remember every passenger's movements. To most, she was just a stewardess, polite, efficient, invisible. But Poirot had learned long ago. The most unassuming people often held the deepest secrets. She was the closest to the crime scene. She saw everything, perhaps too much. And yet, she was afraid. Not of the murder. Of something else. Something or someone this plane had shaken her to her core. And then, it happened. A loud, shattering sound ripped through the tension. A wine glass slipped from Lady Horbury's hand, smashing onto the floor. But that was not what made Poirot's pulse quicken. A single piece of paper fluttered from her lap. Poirot bent down and retrieved it. His breath hitched as he read the hastily scribbled words. "I saw who did it, and if they know I saw, I won't make it to London alive." Who wrote the note? Who had seen the killer? And more importantly, who else on this plane was about to die? The plane touches down at Croydon Airport with an unsettling screech as its wheels scrape against the tarmac. The moment it halts, the air crackles with tension. Authorities rush in, sealing the aircraft and preventing anyone from leaving. A murder has been committed mid-flight, and the situation is already spiraling into chaos. Hercule Poirot, with his sharp gaze and meticulous mind, steps aboard the plane. He surveys the scene, taking in every detail with his usual precision. The passengers are visibly shaken, whispering anxiously to one another. But Poirot knows the answers lie hidden within this very aircraft. This crime, so bold and executed in plain sight, strikes him as particularly intriguing. The puzzle is already beginning to form in his mind as he walks down the narrow aisle, his eyes flicking from one person to the next, taking in every detail. His first breakthrough comes when he examines the space under one of the seats. There, nestled in the shadows, is a small but deadly object, a blowpipe, expertly concealed. Poirot picks it up delicately, running his fingers over its smooth surface, admiring its craftsmanship. It's been used recently, he notes, and the dart that should be attached to it is missing, presumably the weapon used in the murder. Ah, Monday Dieu. A method as old as time, he mutters, his eyes scanning the passengers. One of them, he suspects, had used this blowpipe. But when? And who is hiding behind that carefully constructed mask of innocence? He can almost feel the weight of the mystery pressing down on him as he ponders the dark corners of the plane. Next, Poirot's attention is drawn to Madame Giselle's handbag, which the investigators have now rifled through. The stewardess, looking nervous, reveals that something critical is missing: a letter. The letter, according to the stewardess, was meant to be delivered to someone in London, but it's nowhere to be found. The absence of the letter is chilling. Was it stolen? Poirot asks, his voice tinged with suspicion. The stewardess nods hesitantly. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. It was meant for someone specific. A personal letter, but it's gone now. Gone. Stolen, perhaps, by the very person who stands to gain from its contents being hidden. Poirot's mind spins with the implications. The letter, if found, might reveal the motive here, perhaps the identity of the murderer. The more Poirot considers it, the more he senses that this missing piece holds the key to the entire case. Was it taken by the murderer to protect a secret, or was it hidden to prevent a dangerous revelation from reaching its intended recipient? Poirot's investigation takes him deeper into the heart of the mystery as he begins to study the passengers. Most of them are visibly distraught, whispering among themselves, casting furtive glances at the authorities. But one passenger stands out, a man sitting with unnerving calm. His movements are deliberate, too smooth, too controlled. He seems unaffected by the tension in the air, and his hands remain perfectly still in his lap. A master of disguise. Poirot's eyes narrow. Could this man be the murderer? Or perhaps someone running from a much larger, far more dangerous secret? His little gray cells begin working at full speed, but before he can piece together the next step in his investigation, the head investigator approaches, his face grim. "We've found something else," he says, his voice heavy with dread. Poirot follows him swiftly to the back of the plane, where a small compartment near the galley has been pried open. Inside, hidden beneath a pile of blankets, lies a discovery that sends a chill down Poirot's spine. Another dart. But this one is different. It hasn't been used. Beside it, however, is something far more chilling: a handkerchief, stained with fresh blood. Poirot's mind races. Could there have been another target? A second victim waiting to be silenced? The implications of this discovery are staggering. Before he can voice his suspicions, a blood-curdling scream echoes through the plane, followed by chaos. One of the passengers has collapsed, and the panic in the cabin grows. Poirot's pulse quickens. The murderer is still aboard. The question now is, who is the next target? With every passing moment, the web of intrigue tightens, and Poirot knows that every step forward brings him closer to unraveling a deadly conspiracy. The flight may have landed, but the mystery is far from over. The killer is still lurking, and Poirot is about to discover just how far they're willing to go. What secret lies behind the murder? And who will survive the deadly game of cat and mouse? The final twist. Unmasking the killer. The tension in the room is thick, almost suffocating. The air crackles with nervous energy as Hercule Poirot surveys the faces before him. The passengers, the crew, the suspects, each of them shifting in their seats, some glancing at one another, others avoiding eye contact altogether. Outside, the rain lashes against the windows, as if the heavens themselves are bracing for what is about to be revealed. Poirot, ever the master of theatrics, folds his hands neatly before him and exhales slowly. "Mesdames et messieurs," he begins, his voice calm but laced with authority. The time has come to reveal the truth. A nervous cough from the back, a bead of sweat rolling down a trembling forehead. Somewhere a clock ticks steadily, counting down to the moment of revelation. The web of lies. Everyone is a suspect. At first, Poirot continues, it seemed obvious. Madame Giselle, a woman with many enemies, was killed using a poison dart fired from a blowpipe. A method silent, deadly, and cunning. And what does the evidence suggest? A missing letter, a hidden identity, a passenger too calm in the face of murder. His gaze sweeps across the room, watching for reactions. A flinch, a twitch, a flicker of recognition. Many of you believed the killer was one among you, but no, the true villain was far cleverer than you imagined. They manipulated, they deceived, and most importantly, Poirot's voice lowers, his eyes darkening. They counted on all of you blaming the wrong person. Someone lets out a sharp breath. A hand grips the armrest a little too tightly. The false leads, clues that misled everyone. Poirot paces the room. The blowpipe, a deliberate plant. The missing letter, stolen to throw us off. And the passenger with a hidden identity. A mere smuggler, running from another crime altogether. A red herring. Gasps ripple through the group. Someone mutters under their breath. The shadows in the room seem to grow deeper as Poirot's words cut through the noise like a blade. No, mes amis, the truth is far more insidious. Poirot stops suddenly, his voice like a whip, because the real murderer is sitting among us right now. A deathly silence. The shocking reveal. The true killer unmasked. Poirot turns sharply and points. You, madame. A gasp. The accused, a woman. Her carefully composed face suddenly falters. A tremor runs through her hands as she clutches at the fabric of her dress. Moi, c'est impossible. She protests, but her voice lacks conviction. Poirot presses forward, relentless. You thought no one would suspect you, a quiet presence, blending into the background. But I saw it. A moment of hesitation when the blowpipe was found. A flicker of recognition when the missing letter was mentioned. And most importantly, the one thing you could not hide, the scent of jasmine lingering on the handkerchief, soaked in blood. The room erupts. Someone gasps. Another recoils. The woman's face drains of color. The motive, revenge, greed, or a buried secret. Why would I kill her? She whispers, voice barely audible. Poirot tilts his head, his little gray cells working faster than ever. Ah, but that is the true question, is it not? A murder is never just about the method, it is about the why. He takes a deep breath. Madame Giselle was not just a moneylender. She knew secrets, dark, dangerous secrets, and she knew yours, did she not? The accused's fingers tighten into fists. Her eyes dart toward the door, searching for escape. She knew something about you, Poirot continues, his voice now soft, coaxing. Something you were willing to kill for. Was it blackmail, a hidden scandal? Or perhaps, he pauses, eyes narrowing, a betrayal from long ago, one you could never forgive. The accused lets out a broken laugh. The tension in the room snaps like a bowstring. You think you know everything, Poirot, she whispers, her voice cold now. But you don't know what it's like to live in fear. She stands suddenly. Yes, I killed her, and I would do it again. A collective gasp. Shocked murmurs. Someone grips their chest. Another turns away. Poirot's eyes soften, but only for a moment. But, madam, you made a mistake, and now justice will have its way. The cliffhanger. A chilling twist. The authorities move in, placing her under arrest. The case is closed. Or is it? Just as Poirot is about to leave the room, a small, almost imperceptible noise catches his ear. A whisper. It wasn't just me, the woman breathes, her lips curling into a chilling smile. You still haven't found them, the one who helped me. Poirot stops. The shadows seem darker now. The storm outside rages on. There is still another killer out there, watching, waiting. The room, once filled with the fervor of Poirot's brilliant deduction, now hums with a quieter, more ominous energy. The murmur of voices, the shuffle of feet, and the rustling of clothing are the only sounds breaking the heavy silence. The accused, who only moments ago had worn the mask of composure, now sits broken. Her posture is a picture of defeat, shoulders hunched, as if she were carrying an invisible weight far heavier than her frame could bear. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, are the only remnants of the person she once was, now a hollow reflection of guilt. The officers, with their stern faces and unwavering authority, move towards her, their presence an undeniable force that drives home the irreversible nature of her fate. There's no turning back. No escape from justice. Poirot watches silently, his expression unreadable. He doesn't revel in the woman's downfall. Instead, he remains detached, his sharp mind already shifting beyond this moment, calculating the deeper, more intricate ripples of the crime. His gaze falls to the officers as they lead her away, his fingers steepled behind his back in the classic Poirot manner. Finally, with the faintest of sighs, he speaks, almost as if to himself. "Justice," he murmurs, the word almost philosophical. It is like a well-brewed tea-bist served at the right temperature. The wry smile that crosses his lips is fleeting, barely noticeable, yet it carries an air of wisdom, a knowingness that suggests Poirot's mind never truly rests, even when the case appears to be closed. As the tension in the room begins to lift, the passengers exhale in unison, a collective sigh of relief filling the space. The dread that had hung in the air like a suffocating fog slowly dissipates, replaced by a quiet sense of awe at having survived the nightmare. But while some are quick to shake their heads in disbelief, others exchange nervous, almost guilty glances, as though unsure whether they had narrowly escaped the grasp of death itself. "To think we were sitting next to a murderer all along," one woman murmurs, her voice a mixture of fear and awe. The realization seems to settle over the room like an uncomfortable weight. Some passengers still appear shaken, their minds unable to fully grasp the horror that had unfolded on this very plane. The crew, once visibly rattled by the events, now resumes their duties in a mechanical, almost detached manner. The suitcases are gathered, the final announcements are made, and the plane, which had once been a vessel of tension and terror, is slowly emptied. The sealed doors of the aircraft open with a hiss, revealing the world outside bright, indifferent, and untouched by the turmoil that had taken place in the skies. For them, it's just another day, while for the passengers, this journey will haunt them for years to come. They will never look at a flight the same way again. But Poirot does not move. He remains rooted to the spot, his gaze distant, unfocused, as though lost in a labyrinth of thoughts that others cannot see. His mind, always sharp, is still working, still dissecting the fragments of the case that refuse to fit into a neat, tidy box. Something feels off. Something lingers in the shadows of his mind. The murderer's last words echo through his thoughts like a whisper from a forgotten place. "You still haven't found them. The one who helped me." The words coil around his thoughts like a serpent, growing larger with every passing moment. Poirot feels a shiver travel down his spine. The case, so perfectly resolved, so neatly tied up, feels far from finished. A nagging sensation crawls under his skin, urging him to look deeper, to uncover what has been overlooked. His gaze drifts to his hand, where he still holds a seemingly insignificant object, a button. It had caught his eye earlier, but he had dismissed it, thinking it was a mere trifle, an afterthought. Now, in the quiet aftermath, it feels heavier in his palm, as though it holds a secret that is waiting to be unearthed. Poirot's lips tighten into a thin line as he mutters softly to himself, his voice low and contemplative. "Monday, ami," he says. A clue ignored is like a shadow. It follows, it lingers, and when least expected, it returns. He pockets the button, his mind already racing, his instincts telling him that this small, seemingly insignificant piece of fabric is the key to something far darker. He steps into the cold London air, his eyes flicking to the horizon, a glint of knowing in his gaze. The storm outside, having raged through the night, now seems distant, but the storm within Poirot's mind is only just beginning. As the plane empties and the crowd disperses, the camera focuses on the passengers, each of them moving in their own direction, lost in their thoughts. But one figure remains still, watching, unnoticed by all. This person stands at the periphery of the crowd, their face obscured by the shadows, their eyes trained on the unfolding scene. A slight smile plays at the corners of their lips, a smile that is far too knowing, too satisfied. A gloved hand slips into their pocket, retrieving a second button identical to the one Poirot now holds. The camera zooms in on the button, its simple design betraying no hint of the sinister secrets it harbors. The realization hits Poirot like a bolt of lightning. The case isn't over. The true game is only just beginning. Somewhere, hidden in the shadows of London's labyrinthine streets, the real mastermind still watches, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The mystery is far from solved. In fact, it may have only just begun.